Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Astra. Well, what happened there? Well, ultimately, something went wrong with the launch, having had to postpone it already. Something went wrong with the telemetry on launch and ultimately ended up in disaster, and they lost the payload and they lost a NASA satellite, etc. So, bad news for the company. Obviously, that affected the share price. It got absolutely hammered. But ultimately, what has happened, they will hopefully learn some lessons from this. And space is hard, and it is especially hard when you're trying to do it in the most cost-effective way possible. That's what this is all about, guys. The Astra is trying to be as cheap and as economically viable as they can to get a route to space for companies that might not be able to afford the more expensive companies that are out there. If Astra can streamline that process and can deal with the reliability issues, okay, they've lost one so far. If you look over at SpaceX and how many issues SpaceX had while trying to establish its unique selling point, albeit they're not a public company, so they never had chance to have their share price get absolutely hammered in the same way that Astra's has. Ultimately, space is super hard. It isn't going to be easy. I wouldn't be surprised if yet another rocket along the path did go wrong. It does happen. That is part of space travel and space flight, of course. However, hopefully the next launch, which will be coming down the pipeline once the FAA and the Astra investigation is complete, will be a success, and then that should have a positive effect on the share price. There was a bit of an overreaction in my humble opinion. Obviously, you expect the share price to sell off, but to have it sell off so hard was a little bit of an overreaction. I get that there's other market factors out there as well. So today we're going to get in there. We're going to dive into what Astra is doing about what happened and where we are going forward. I perfectly admit that the video that I made previously, that the stock could double, was obviously wrong. However, I didn't quite expect them to launch and then have it go wrong in flight and lose the payload that they were going to happen, although that is always a unlikely outcome. So let's get in there and So ultimately, the Astra stock's share price actually went up by 10% yesterday in a bit of a market rebound that happened even though the situation in Ukraine is a bit dire. But as you can see, pre-market today, it has dumped 5% of that straight back. So a bit of here and there about that, and the market cap is now sitting at 873 million. Anyway, that's not really what we're here to talk about. I mean, the effect of the launch is quite profound on where the share price was. It dumped off half its value on the 10th of Feb, all the way down to $3.20 a share. A bit of an overreaction in my opinion, but hey, that's just me. So Astra took to Twitter quite a little while ago now to say that they are complying with an investigation with the FAA and running their own routine investigation to find out exactly what happened and hopefully prevent it from happening again, of course. So if we pop on over to the Astra website, they are doing a full investigation. They announced that quite early on and complying with the Federal Aviation Administration Administration authorised Astra to lead the investigation. So this leads to it being a few things. You've got a flight data review, a timeline reconstruction, the fault tree analysis, and implementing corrective and preventive actions, which is what this is all about. You want it to be a learning experience, so we stop this from happening again, or at least happening as often again, because obviously we know that space is an incredibly difficult sector to be in and requires an awful lot of engineering. So the schedule for their space launch is still looking at March for the next launch. There's no time and date at the moment. It just says March, but that will likely depend on the outcome of the investigation and if they find what the problem was, and then they can fix it in time. So that is sort of a data pending. They did have one scheduled for late February, but obviously that time is now pretty much expired. The investigation isn't complete, so obviously that's not going to happen. And this is ultimately why Astra has struggled. So they are trying to be frugal in their design process to try and be as literally as frugal as possible. Make a rocket that's as economically viable but as cheap as possible to make getting satellites into orbit as cheap as possible for the customers while still making a margin in it for themselves. So they called it an unusual failure, which is perhaps not entirely off the mark, to be fair. Like, you are going to have to look into that and see what they will. Rocket 3 was among the smallest orbital boosters to ever fly, and it dwarfs in comparison to the likes of SpaceX, Blue Origin, and even Rocket Lab's Electron, which is itself a small rocket. It's still probably the smallest that they can. And I'm not going to say that it's made out of cheap materials, but it's made to do a specific purpose and go after a specific market. This company is not going to be launching a Tesla Roadster into orbit anytime soon. They're specifically designed to go after small satellite launches and be competitive with SpaceX's ride share program, but do it in their own way and hopefully be cheaper than that. So they had a slight issue with the second stage, which you can actually see live on this website. You can see the gubbins of the rocket here and the inside, which is partially tucked out. So there is compromise out there that has to happen. Obviously, if you make your rocket out the most expensive ingredients and parts possible, then of course the likelihood of failure does diminish. But then you make the rocket so expensive, and this is what has happened with NASA in the past, that it is practically economically unviable and therefore difficult for a company to make a profit off. So this is more about that side of things there. I'm not going to read all of it to you, but you can get yourself on Hackaday and have a look at the Astra's website. So as you can have a look here, we're just going to quickly see what actually happened on board the rocket. So you can see it failed to do something failed to break away properly, and then it did break away, but it sent the rocket off on its spiraling out of its telemetry, which is not good. Like I say, I'm not a space engineer. This website says it's not a space engineer, but hopefully it's something that they can easily work on. As I said, SpaceX, all sorts of space companies, even NASA themselves, have struggled with delivering payloads to space before. It is not unusual in the field to have launch failures and lose payloads on their way to orbit. The share price reaction is unusual because we don't usually see that many space companies that are publicly traded. So to me, that is obviously something that you're going to see in how the market reacts to that sort of thing. That was a minor disaster for the company. However, one rocket isn't the end of the world because they're making them relatively cheaply. Even the satellites on board weren't exactly earth-breaking. I know NASA will be disappointed that they lost them, but they weren't also super expensive. So it's very much on to the next launch and find out exactly what happened and put it right for the next one. And then eventually, hopefully, we can get back on track and find a way to bring them launches a lot more often, so being once a month, twice a month, once a week, twice a week, and then almost daily. That is where this company's bread and butter will eventually be. They've just got to get out the little gremlins that are in the system at the moment, and I do believe they can do so. They have got still plenty of cash runway going forward. I can see that another share raise, or they will have to take on some debt much further down the line if they struggle to scale up the rocket production, or they have further launch failures, and that will be a bit of an issue and a risk as an investor. But the upside of that, if they do achieve everything that they set out to do and the strategy does start to pay off, then the share price can't really get much lower from here. I mean, how can it? You've watched a rocket go bang on the launch pad. I don't think there's that much more of a bottom to be had. It can only sort of, pardon the pun, go up from here with successes going forward. However, if there are subsequent launch failures, then of course we're going to stagnate at around the $3 mark, which we're already seeing, and perhaps test the high $2 section as well, which obviously ultimately wouldn't be too good for the company. I'm an optimist, so I'm thinking that they're going to be able to get this sorted and they're going to be able to start delivering on the strategy going forward, and that is why I still maintain my position in the company. While I do maintain my position in the company, what I would say is it is within my risk appetite and it doesn't make up a massive proportion of my portfolio. So I'm happy with my diversification. There is a very high upside to be had for this company. There isn't too much downside from here. My position is double-digit percentages down, just for disclosure purposes. Of course, with that, I was a shareholder before the recent rocket launch fail, but I'm not too fussed as long as they can start to deliver on, as I've already mentioned, start to deliver successful launches further down the line and learn from the incident that happened. Thank you very much for watching today, guys. Do please smash that like button and continue to keep up with Astra on this channel. Thank you for watching.